you got to realize that you've got formal leaders and you've got informal leaders in a church. And you're taught in seminary the formal leaders. Formal leaders are whoever the name is on the door, depending on the governance of the church. It might be deacon, it might be personnel team, whatever. But where guys don't realize is just as important, if not more so, are the informal leaders. Those are the people that when you begin to make change, 50 people will go and ask that person, what do they think? Now, you're not kissing up to them, but you're taking the abundance of counselors, there's victory. That just doesn't mean you're going to make a better decision. That also means they're going to have potentially buy-in on what that is.
Welcome to the Pastor's Lab podcast, a new resource for helping church leaders think biblically and strategically about the local church. In each episode, I'll talk with thriving church leaders on the front lines of ministry across the nation, discussing best practices, innovative ideas, and healthy habits. I'm Ronnie Parrott, and I believe churches get better when their leaders learn together. If you're new to the podcast, thanks for joining. Please subscribe and turn on the notifications so you can stay up to date on the latest podcasts. Each week, I'm joined by a co-host to help me interview our guest for the show. Joining me as my co-host this week is a dear friend, a good friend, Dr. John Mark Harrison. John Mark has been the pastor of First Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'll just stop here and say go Vols, since I am from Knoxville. He's been there since 2018 and just recently celebrated his 5-year anniversary as pastor. John Mark surrendered to ministry while attending the University of Alabama, where he met his wife, Bridget. Together, they have 2 children, Cade and Mia. He received his bachelor's degree from Samford University and holds Master of Divinity and Doctor of Ministry degrees from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. Welcome to the podcast, John Mark.
Ronnie, thanks, man, for having me. I'm excited to be with you guys. We're such close friends, and I'm thankful for that. But I do pastor First Baptist Concord, which is in Knoxville, just not First Baptist Knoxville, which is...
Is that what I said? Knoxville?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
You nailed the rest of it.
That's right.
The rest of it.
My bad. It's all good. It's all good. It's First Baptist Concord. That's right. Hey, listen, I'm glad we got that down.
We're in Knoxville.
I do love this thought, though, that you're an Alabama guy and that you're in Knoxville having to cheer on the Vols, and I just think it's awesome.
Well, man, it's an interesting shade of orange, but it's growing in our closets. I don't talk about it on Sundays. I refer to my upbringing as the state not to be named on Sunday. So it's a passionate fan base, and I do live in the new national championship city. So, they're fired up right now.
Nice, man. That's awesome. Well, today we have a guest that John Mark and I are interviewing, and our guest is the pastor of Biltmore Church in Asheville, North Carolina. He's been there since 2008, just over 15 years. Biltmore is a fascinating church in our state. It has a lot of influence. It has 7 campuses around Western North Carolina. It has repeatedly been recognized as one of the largest and fastest growing churches in the country. Our guest today is Dr. Bruce Frank. Bruce, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, good to be here, Ronnie. John Mark, always good to see you, my brother.
Great to see you.
I've been really looking forward to this podcast. I've been doing these podcasts, and this one I've been really interested in because of your relationship you two share together. And I'd love for our audience to know all about that relationship. And John Mark's got a lot to add to this conversation as well. But let's start with you, Bruce. Why don't you give? I shared some things about John Mark, but why don't you share kind of the 1 to 2 minute overview of who you are and really what you're passionate about?
Sure. I mean, in 2 minutes, I grew up in a good home, not a Christian home. Came to Christ as a 17-year-old and got discipled, a little bit of parachurch. Met my wife, who grew up as a minister's kid. I went to seminary while she was doing nursing school. And then first church, really, we've been in ministry, I guess, 35 years, and God's been super gracious. From the very first church, they kind of raised us. And, we've been at Biltmore now almost 16 years. We were in Texas up until moving here. And honestly, Biltmore's been a great ride for almost 16 years. I mean, the COVID years for everybody was a challenge, but other than that, it's been up and to the right, and it's been fun. Got a great team. John Mark and our relationship, he was actually the student pastor when I came here. We hit it off immediately. He had Texas roots as well. And so he and I hit it off, immediately. I got a bunch. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be kind of like a détente here. He's got stories about me, but I have stories about him. So
this is great.
We will see what the vulnerability quotient is on this podcast. But
we got to be careful.
No, John Mark, I feel like a big brother to him, but I learned as much from him as he ever did from me, and tremendous respect. And it's one of the biggest joys in ministry is see guys that have, been a part of this church. And we've got a number of senior pastors out around the country that played roles here. And, as you get a little bit older, that ends up being even more kind of part of the DNA that you treasure as you see guys that were with you and then they went out and are doing just a huge kingdom work. And so anyway, great respect for him, loving him and his family. And they've been friends. We hit it off really the week I got here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I was only at the church like 6 months before the previous pastor left, and super confused by that because, left Houston to come to Asheville, major life change. And like for the guy, for it just to go that way, I didn't see it coming. And just, Lord, what are you doing? And God knew what he was doing as he had me there, and Bruce came, and man, it was just a very natural, lot of respect of just the way he leads and who he is and how he raises kids, like all those things. So a lot of respect, and it has built upon just a great friendship. I think we're closer now that I'm not on staff than when I was on staff,
I would agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
This is
an interesting discussion too. How close can you be? Anyway, that might be one of the questions.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. This is one of the, there's a lot of guys listening to this podcast. Some may be senior pastors, some may be associate pastors. And that relationship between associate and senior pastor can be strained at times. It can be good at times. You have some guys who were like maybe itching to go preach and lead on their own, but the Lord hasn't opened that door. Why don't we talk a little bit about that? As John Mark, you sat in that role. For the listeners, John Mark is an incredibly thriving, successful senior pastor. Right now, he's coming to us from student camp. Where there are
student camp,
like 700, 800 high school and middle school teenagers.
Well, it's just high school.
Okay.
So it's a little over 500. They're doing great though, man. They're doing great. We were at it. I taught this morning, then we went out to rec, and it's 1,000 degrees. So I was thankful for this podcast to be able to come inside from rec. And but yeah, so that's not my picture. That's a condo.
Yeah, right. But you got John Mark. He's down with the students as a senior pastor, and again, he's just a thriving leader. And you have Bruce, who's again a very successful senior pastor. But you guys once were working together. John Mark, why don't you talk to us about like when did you know, or give us some thoughts to the guy who's sitting out there going, man, I'm wrestling with wanting to be a senior pastor one day. What was that like serving under Bruce? And what kind of advice would you give a guy who's trying to be faithful now?
Yeah, no, man, I remember that season because I really wanted that to go well. Meaning, man, I'd been there for a little while, and as student ministry we were doing great. Student ministry was going incredible, but I just kind of had that gnawing, like, man, I think one day I want the ball, so to speak. I want that lead chair, and there were just a couple things. I brought Pastor Bruce in very early, but even before there was a church, I brought him in just to say, hey, man, I think this is something that one day the Lord will lead me to. So we started going to lunch once a month, and I brought questions, and I made sure I didn't want to waste his time. I want to make sure that we redeemed the time. Hey, you remember that one time, Bruce? We were at a restaurant, and a church member, very kind church member, saw us, wanted to bless us, and Ronnie, she sent us one dessert with 2 spoons.
Oh, talk about an awkward dessert moment.
Yeah. Or no, actually, yeah, she sent a dessert over, and the waiter asked 1 spoon or 2, and we both like two bowls. To
I was like, I don't know if can I eat this dessert? I don't know.
Yeah. So, Ronnie, it is Asheville, so we had to clarify.
Yeah, right.
Be careful. But I just wanted not to waste his time. I wanted him to know that even, man, maybe the Lord was doing this in me, but I was going to break the tape. You know what I'm saying? Meaning there was not going to be any type of lag or gap in me finishing ministry assignment there. And then when the Lord brought us Apex, which is where we moved to. We moved to Apex Baptist, Apex, North Carolina. I mean, he was in that conversation the whole time, and then I just really wanted to leave well. Like I wanted to honor him and honor the church, and leave well. And that kind of mentality filtered every decision I made. It wasn't really about what I wanted. It was about how do I leave Biltmore well, and it was about how do I make sure that I honor my pastor. And so that was kind of the process for me. But he was incredibly generous, incredibly gracious. He didn't have to do and be who he was to me, but it has made our friendship now that much stronger.
That's awesome. And Bruce, on your side of things, obviously, I mean, I know I've heard horror stories here around senior pastors who, when a guy tells them they want to be someone else or be their own senior pastor or whatever, they immediately kind of get cast as, okay, he's going somewhere else, move along now. Can you talk to us about, from your perspective, on how a guy can honor their pastor?
Yeah, I mean, and what John Mark just said, I mean, he made it very easy in regards to, and what he didn't mention is he was in student ministry, and then as we talked, he was our first multi-site pastor. So he kind of promoted into that, and then eventually promoted into what was called the executive team. As we started getting into multi-site, he was like in that chair there. But I would think, communication is key, and the relationship is key. John Mark's a high character person. And if you have communication and character, it should be able to work out. And you're 100% right, Ronnie. Sometimes the system helps you, helps protect it. But I think most of it is just, are you communicating? But you got to have some trust. I mean, John Mark, we've all heard the horror stories on both sides. We've heard it where, let's just say a campus pastor shares he's maybe thinking the Lord is leading him somewhere, and the senior pastor freaks out and gives him 2 weeks. Yeah. On the other hand, we've also seen it where campus pastors all of a sudden feel led of the Lord to plant a church 2 blocks away from the campus, in which, they kind of like they got given third base and they think they hit a triple, versus they realize that that's the platform a church had given them. And so there's horror stories on both sides. But that was, again, a lot of it comes down to communication and character. John Mark had both those in spades. And I would say the way he left is actually, I would say, a model. Back when you wrote blogs, I wrote a blog about, this is the model of how you actually leave a church regardless. Just in the way, high honor, didn't try to fix things or take shots on the way out, or, made sure that how do we communicate it down the line. I mean, his textbook in every way, on not just the way he left, but also the 6 months previous. We had a relationship at that point where I was like, hey, and there was a bunch of churches obviously wanting to talk to John Mark. And hey, you might ask this question, you might ask this question. Is this the right time to talk about the budget or so I was kind of able to, I guess that would have been the first time you were interviewing a senior pastor, even as those church team matches. So that's a little different experience. I tried to do, the same thing with Marcus a little bit. But in John Mark's case, not just high character, good communication, but super teachable. That's the thing that sets him apart in so many ways is he will take and learn, and then has the talent to do it. But again, a lot of it comes down to character, communication.
That's good.
That worked out real well.
Ronnie,
some of the best.
I think too. Sorry, man. I just think too. So many guys, like I remember that season. Yeah, I mean, we were feeling led of the Lord that way, and but until I got to Apex, it wasn't about Apex. It was about Biltmore. And so many guys, they already get there before they leave, and there's where the error is. I mean, it was not about Apex Baptist until I arrived in Apex, North Carolina, and we made sure. And I even talked to Bridget. And our son was real young then, but it was like we are about Biltmore. We're wearing Biltmore t-shirts. I think we arrived into Apex wearing Biltmore t-shirts. You know what I mean? So just wanted to make sure that that the church knew how much we loved and appreciated them.
It's good. I often tell guys, you're not accountable for the people you will have then. You're accountable for the people you have now. And so whatever wrestle you're at, you serve where you're at until the Lord picks up the tent and moves you.
That's it.
Yeah. John Mark, you spent how many years were you there under Bruce's leadership?
I was there a total of 6, almost 7 years. So I would say it'd be 4, somewhere around that 4 number that we were together.
Well, what was there, a year? You were here 6 months? So 4 to 5, because the interim was a year. You got here a year or 6 months, so it's minus 1.5 years.
Yeah.
What are
Yeah.
so what are some of those things like when you go to Apex? John Mark was at Apex Baptist Church in the Raleigh Durham area before
Wonderful
he moved to
church.
Concord.
Yeah. Wonderful people. I mean, like, I can't say enough about how awesome that place was.
Booming now under the new pastor.
Yeah. Zeb's
I
doing
mean,
a great job.
under you, it was okay, I guess. I'm just joking.
We survived.
Yeah,
We
that's right.
survived. Yeah.
What were some of the things that you have carried on from church to church that you learned under Bruce's leadership? Bruce, I'm
Oh
coming to
man.
you for a question. Sorry.
No, no.
Strategic thinking, strategic leadership. We still do, like, even today, I start every year with a strategic plan. I learned that from him. And then I give all of our ministry leaders an action plan, and their action plan should fulfill the strategic plan. And then once they make their action plan, they make a budget request that fulfills their action plan that is in alignment with their strategic plan. So when I go to finance committee and say, here's our budget, like, it's not like, hey, they got $10,000 last year, we want to give them $12,000 this year. It's like, here's a full ministry plan and the money we need to do it. And if they're like, well, we need to pull this back some, then we got to go through that thing talking about, well, what do you not want to do? Because every dollar is tied to a ministry activity or event. And I learned all that from him. And that has been gold. That has given our lay people so much confidence in how we spend the Lord's money at the church. And I got all that from him.
That's awesome. I'd love to know more about that. What from your perspective, Bruce, what are some of the things that you're trying to intentionally instill? I mean, I'm good friends with Marcus Hayes. He's been at your church and out, and others have come through, Biltmore served with you and are out there pastoring. Those guys are all have a little bit of your DNA in them because of who you are. What are some of the top principles that you're trying to instill in the leaders who are closest to you and those that you're sending out?
Yeah, I mean, Ronnie, we've learned it's some of it's changed over the years. Hopefully, as I grow, because I think one of the main things of a leader is always be learning. And so I've learned, even as bad as COVID was, we learned how to develop our young guys more. Before it was happening almost haphazardly or by accident because you were having so much momentum and you're like, what could ever go wrong? Who could not do good in this system? And then when COVID hit, we're like, and then you had the Great Resignation and all this. And so you're like, how are we developing? Our staff was super young. It's all, and that's on purpose, not super young, but it trends younger. I think the average age, if you take the senior team out, is like 28 or 29. And so part of that was learning how to speak that generation, especially as the gap grew a little bit longer. But when we have our staff values that we even during COVID, like, let's identify these staff values, and then you've got to teach them, you've got to push them down, you've got to reward them. And there would be ones that are similar, just different language. We're going to, choose to trust, we're going to show honor, those kind of things that go all the way down the system. But probably the thing that changed during COVID is like, all right, as a multi-site church, because I want my first love or my first responsibility is to the health of Biltmore, but secondarily, I want all those guys to, I want them to, and I have a role in helping them find what God wants them to do. And so, whether it be part of what we do now is like, okay, let's say Daniel Evans, he's our East Campus pastor. It's like, Daniel, where do you want to be in 3 years? I want to, and that helps it stay fresh. And then we have suggestions. Well, you got to get better at this, or you got to get this education, you got to do that. But it also helps if I know a guy wants to be a senior pastor, and that's where the CP role is it's almost like the new, like when John Mark and maybe even a little bit younger than him, it was like the youth minister at a big church, then they went to be a senior pastor. Kind of
Right.
The new one is campus pastor. And there's 5 different models of campus pastor, of teaching and all that kind of stuff. But the biggest thing going back to that original one is you have to communicate with them. And where do you want to be in 3 years? Okay, if you want to be a senior pastor, that helps me understand how I can make sure that camp, I might put an associate underneath him to kind of learn for a year or so. So it's really, Ronnie, you want it to be a win-win. I mean, it's not always a win-win, but you can definitely be intentional in making it a win. I mean, the John Mark and Biltmore was a win-win. Anytime you lose a person of John Mark's caliber, it hurts in regards to, it's like one of your best teammates, but kingdom-wise, you're thinking, and that's kind of part of the DNA of our church now, is listen, if it can be a win-win, we send them out, and so a little bit of our DNA goes to the Woodlands with Marcus, or it goes to Knoxville with John Mark, and, that's teaching your people, big C church, not just little C church.
Yeah, no, that's good. There is every person's different. And you know what it's like leading people in general, not just church members, but eager young men who have a passion for leading their own churches one day. And the benefit of knowing each one individually, knowing, like, having the relationship with them, seeing who they are, seeing where they could go, and being able to discern what is next for each one of them. I think talking to Marcus and other guys, they've always appreciated your ability to kind of know who they are, know where they want to go, care for them well, and lead them well. And I think any senior pastor listening should really not take advantage of their staff so much, but also lead their staff well, encourage their staff, and help their staff fulfill whatever it is that God's called them to do while they're with them, but also help them fulfill the things they want to do in the long run. So I appreciate that about you.
No, it's good. And I get to Marcus and John Mark, though, on the other side, they make it easy because they work their tail off while they're here and don't make it. There was never a sense in which that, okay, this is a springboard. In other words, even though they know they're going to have opportunities, they both, and John Mark, he mentioned about how he ended, but that's also, he knew he was going to be a senior pastor years before he went to Apex, but there was never a sense of him using the church just to get to the next step. And that might be, it's hard to quantify, but it's certainly noticeable when it is there. I think all three of us know. And so if you're listening and you're a staff person, and you're like, my senior pastor's maybe he's not really, helping me out. I wish he would help more out like Bruce. I would say also look at it. You can't change him, but don't give him any reason to doubt your commitment to the mission at hand, because that makes it a lot easier to help somebody if you know that, hey, we're all in here. I'm not looking at every church that gives me a call. I would say I'm getting off on a rabbit chase, but I've also had guys that every time a church would call them would let me know. And that's even if it was a phone call. Hey, I got a phone call. And most of that's just insecurity, kind of almost like, hey, I got a call from First Baptist such and such. And it's almost like an insecurity to say, I am wanted out there. But you do that a couple of times, then what I would take is you're not really here. You're not really here. And to John Mark's credit, he got run out a bunch of times, and only when it got serious, when, okay, help me discern God's will, did he then bring it. And so if you're listening to that, you don't need to take everyone to the senior pastor to validate your importance. And that way, when John Mark did do it, it meant something, and we walked through it and asked these questions. So there's two sides of that, two sides to make it work good.
Yeah, that's it. And that's right. That's really how it happened. It was like, all right, this one is something that I got to talk about. He wasn't looking to talk. It was like, I can't ignore this. It was location. It was opportunity. Like all of the things were starting. Like, yeah, I got to leave. So that was definitely a kind of judgment call of when to do that. Funny story, Ronnie. When I was at Apex, like a few weeks, I called and got his voicemail. I was like, hey, on a Thursday. Yeah. I was like, hey, I just want to apologize for every time I came in your office on Thursday and it wasn't that important, because now I know the feeling of like, if I don't get this sermon done, I don't get a weekend, and here we are. So, but right. Like, it's like, it was so funny. I was just like, I'm just apologizing for every time I did it, and I'll never do it again. So
that's hilarious.
When the seat changes, everything changes. And one of the things I appreciate about Bruce, how structured he is. You know what he's doing. He's structured in his life, and that's something I'm trying to learn. And that's exactly, I get a sabbatical here coming up. So 5-year anniversary, got a sabbatical coming, and start next week after beach camp here. And just that's one of the things I want to work on. I want to get more disciplined in my structure. I'm letting things bleed into the weekend too much. Bruce, I know you did that last year. You want to talk to us about that? Like, even for me, like, what are some of the things you do on sabbatical?
Yeah, and I would say it's going to vary a little bit. I do one every 5 years, or I get one every 5 years. Personnel, I got a great personnel team. They basically say, manage, take the time you need, but it's almost mandated every 5 years. Take 6 weeks. Obviously some of it needs, and I've done different things. I've had 3 of them. I think the first one, Lori and I did like a whole week marriage intensive out in Colorado. Then the 10-year anniversary time with her was Hawaii. I don't know everybody can do that, but our church was super gracious about it. And then last year, her and I went to the beach for sure. I spent a little more time in a hunting blind than I normally would have. So that was good. Since the elk were nowhere to be found, I got a lot of the series planning done for the following year. So that was good. But I would say what restores and refreshes you. Some guys, hey, let me go to Oxford and study. That's not how I'm going to get restored. And John Mark, you know what restores your love for God, your love for people. And it takes a while. I mean, he's driven just like I am. It takes a while to stop, checking the email, stop doing that, all of those things. So in some ways, just tailor it to what is going to restore you. You'll be shocked. And it's very encouraging, but slightly embarrassing, because when you come back, and it happened this time, people are like, "Oh man, you're so on fire. Oh man, this is like the best preacher I've ever heard, blah, blah, blah." And you want to go, "Man, was I sucking that bad before?"
Right.
People?
Yeah.
Was that like that haggard before? But it really, you don't know, because John Mark, to your credit, I mean, you've changed in 5 years. I mean, you made a lot of changes at Apex, but you made a lot of changes there. You've been super deliberate, but I've got a little sense. I mean, nobody. I've been Ronnie. I was an XP for 4 years and learned probably as much as an XP in a large setting as I did. But you can learn stuff from the second chair. You don't, without having to take the shots. And I would just say, John Mark, you're more tired than you know you are. I bet you, because you've given nothing. I mean, there's no chair like that first chair in regards to change. Change. You've changed a lot there. That church is going and blowing now. It's kind of on dead center. And so, how long do you get? A couple months?
I get 6 weeks. Yeah.
Just whatever. Some of it's just going to happen organically. The only thing I would say is don't fill every minute with an activity unless that activity really, really restores your soul. But there's just some downtime, kind of Mary versus Martha.
That's good. Doing it with kids in the home makes it interesting too, because they're like, "Daddy's here. Let's go do some things." I'm like, "Well, let's go do some things."
Okay. Yeah, I did a sabbatical after 5 years here at Christ Community, and we spent like 3 weeks in Florida, did Disney, did the beach, and something else. And, I came back more tired than I was when I went. We have 6 kids, and so it was like loaded down, traveling. It was a memory. I'm not sure it was a vacation, but it was a good memory.
Yeah, what do they say?
Got the pictures.
If the kids go, it's a trip. If the kids stay home, it's a vacation. So
that's right.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. I think it was the hottest time ever in Florida for 3 weeks at Disney in July. Let's talk a little bit about something that you're really good at, Bruce. Leading change in a church. You have seen Biltmore go through all kinds of seasons. You've been there 16 years almost, and there's some guys who have been in their churches for 2 years and they're trying to figure it out, brand new to their church, or even older guys who know that they need to make some changes today. Talk to us a little bit about leading change from your heart. What are some maybe things you'd share with some guys thinking through it?
Yeah, and it might vary depending on if you're an older guy that has some tenure versus a new guy. One of the better things that I ever got told was by Jim Henry. He just said, the first 2 years at a church, you are the pastor. The next 2 years, you are our pastor. And then year 5 and on, you are our leader. And that is a fairly decent synopsis of what, I guess it was Maxwell that just talks about, the number of chips that you have in your pocket. And that's always been an easy one to communicate when he talks about, and how many you get when you go to a church varies depending on a bunch of factors, including your predecessor, including how, so for example, the church in Houston I was at, the guy that I followed, he and his wife were swingers. Yes, swingers. So
okay,
I didn't have there weren't a lot of chips that were given you based on respect for the position. So that was a little different change model. And then coming here, I had a guy that served with honor for 14 years. The office and the senior team were very respected. So I got a few more chips in that regard. But I would say, a couple things, Ronnie. most of the change stuff is about wisdom versus right and wrong. It's trying to use some wisdom in decisions. And what I would say about that, was Proverbs talk about wisdom, a house is built. And so you're trying to make these decisions. And I think one of the things you've got to ask is, what is this going to cost? What is this change going to cost? Because people, it's not that they don't like change. They just don't like the unknown, and they don't know you. If you're the new guy, they don't know you. And they might pigeonhole, like, again, one last analogy, and I'll give you an example. I would recommend guys generally changing something like, if you have a big tree, starting with the small limbs and working your way to the big limbs. What are most of the time when you do your Nehemiah walk, the first X number of months, you're going to see with a set of fresh eyes 25, 35 things that could be better. It's like, man, that could change. This staff could change. This could change. Our music. You're not there because you're not there because it was perfect. Typically, you're there for a reason. Somebody either retired or saw the grass was greener, / the Lord called them, whatever it is, there are things that could be done better. And then you've got to have some wisdom in figuring out, what is the first thing I do and what is it going to cost me? And I think, and also, what is it going to provide trust? So, like, I remember when John Mark, I remember vaguely some of the early decisions. It's like, what's it going to cost, but what are you going to gain from it? Mm-hmm. For example, John Mark, I don't remember if this is Biltmore or if this was Apex or both, but I think there's some easy stuff. I think it was Apex. It's like, man, they've been doing VBS and then didn't follow up, if I remember right, weren't following up ever on hundreds of new kids.
Right.
Well, that's not going to cost you a lot, and that has a massive, return, so to speak. The ones that obviously usually the ones you've got to be wise about are, what they call this, either the sacred cows. Because the thing about the sacred cows, which is what new pastors particularly don't like because it looks like a waste, they just need to keep in mind at some point those things probably were effective, and they all have emotional baggage and history to them. And so it might not be you're going to have this in 5 years, but the question is not just, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to keep it? You might know in your mind you're not going to keep that thing, but is it wise to do it right now with people that don't know you? I would always advise guys to there's always a few easy wins that are pretty obvious to everybody. An example of how not to do it is, in my opinion, when guys go in and one of the first things they do is say, I got to change the bylaws, and they spend all their chips on that. That's usually very foolish, because you shouldn't go to the church if you can't work for some amount of time with the bylaws that they have. Now, you might get to that down the road, but they don't know you. The second thing I would say for change is you got to realize that you've got formal leaders and you've got informal leaders in a church. And you're taught in seminary the formal leaders. Formal leaders are whoever the name is on the door, depending on the governance of the church. It might be deacon, it might be personnel team, whatever. But where guys don't realize is just as important, if not more so, are the informal leaders. Those are the people that when you begin to make change, 50 people will go and ask that person, what do they think? Now, you're not kissing up to them, but you're taking the abundance of counselors, there's victory. That just doesn't mean you're going to make a better decision. That also means they're going to have potentially buy-in on what that is. So that's a lot of chicken dinners, Ronnie. That's a lot of, like in my case, it was a lot of Q&A, especially with the groups that were most affected. Most people know the thing that is going to catch the most attention is usually the worship service and the changing of the style of worship, because that's the most visible. And then the last thing I would do is if the people have questions, there's almost always the common ground is typically in our tribe, it's the Bible. We hold the Bible super high, and we hold evangelism super high, the Great Commission. And if what you're doing, and anything you do change-wise should be in those two lanes anyway. So I think part of it is explaining to the people that aren't sure this is the best way to show them how this can be effective. And that's where those little wins help you a lot. So
Yeah.
like when John Mark gets follow-up to Vacation Bible School and all of a sudden they see 6 new families the next week and see, people getting baptized that they hadn't seen in a while, a bunch of things happen in a church really quick. He gets trust, momentum begins to kick in. You can even be a little more assertive in what you think that is. But I mean, that speed of trust is a key issue. And I would just tell the young guys, realize don't underestimate what can be done in 5 years, and don't overestimate what can be done in 1 year. So just realize you're there to lead the sheep, and most of them want to go someplace. You just got to pass. This is what can be. And I would
That's
let
great.
one last thing, and we can go back and forth. I would say also, I haven't been there because I've been here long enough as I've aged so I'm here. And I'm trying to stay very teachable, so we're changing, and our staff is getting, I'm trying to almost change, making sure young guys are here. What I don't want to do is in 6 or 7 or 8 years or whenever I end up passing this thing on, is I know there'll be some things I'll need to do to set the next guy up so he doesn't have to do that. So
Right.
you mentioned earlier, if a guy is an older pastor, what can he do? I would say, he's usually got a lot of relational chips. And I think, what you think of is, early on you're learning, your 40s and your 50s, you were leveraging, you're trying to make it happen because that's when your high productivity time is. And then when you're leaving, that's what you're doing. You're thinking, how do I leave this in great shape? Which means you might need to, look at your staff. You might need to have a couple of them retire with you. You might need to make a hard decision so that the next guy doesn't have to. But if you're in your 60s and you're a few years away from retirement, your whole thing is to get it set up for the next guy. I think kingdom-wise, it's not about being comfortable. You've got the relational chips. You don't want him having to spend it on all that stuff. I could give you good and bad examples of that. But anyway, those are just some initial thoughts. But we can drill down on any of them.
No, that's great. John Mark, you've been at 2 churches and you've effectively led change at both.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, this is the conversation, honestly, that has allowed me to kind of weave my way through 2 different churches that, both of them were in decline when we came and got to see them start growing again. And it's that conversation that we just had, honestly, that helped me frame up, how do we do this? And obviously coming out of Apex, coming to First Baptist Concord, I had a lot more kind of ministry philosophy, I guess holistic ministry philosophy. I know I was there for 6 years as a senior pastor, so I kind of knew, how I felt like, this is my unique gift set and skill, and this is how I'd like, I had a little more of that than I did going to Apex, and so I just really made a commitment that I wanted to lead in a way that the people received it as like an extension of their story, meaning Concord's got a long, rich history. And so it wasn't that I was going to come in and be the rescuer. I was actually going to come in and help them go back to who they had been. And we're going to have to do that in some different ways. And so I think, lead and change, if you can come in and help them see as an extension of what God has been doing in their church, it just maybe in a different way, it gets you early buy-in. And that was super helpful for us. I think too, just the thought of, I think too many pastors try and solve problems before their people realize their problems. And so, it's that idea of, just walk just out in front, like if you're just out in front of your people, they see you as the leader. If you're, further out in front of your people, they see you as their mascot. They cheer you on, but they don't actually come help you do anything. And if you're way out in front, you're the enemy and they shoot at you. And I know a lot of guys that, they're just too far out in front of their people. And so how do we extend their story, bring them along, keep them with us? And that means some things that are problems just got to lay over in the corner and you can't deal with them yet because your people, that informal leadership structure he was talking about, doesn't yet realize their roadblocks. Now you can hint to it, point to it. I even do that in the pulpit sometimes. Like, hey, at some point we're going to have to answer this question. And I don't name the ministry, but if you are anywhere engaged, I'm talking about it. So I'll even lead that way from the pulpit. So I'm not to embarrass or not to be harsh towards, but just to help the church recognize there are things we still got to put our attention to.
And sometimes
really
when you feed, and sometimes if you're making change, you don't have to immediately, you've kind of 2 philosophies. You can shoot the sacred cow or you can starve the sacred cow. while you feed something that is obviously more effective for the kingdom, and treat this group with respect. Because again, they don't, to John Mark's point, some of them get it immediately. Oh, of course, that's a better way. Of course, that makes total sense. Some of them, it takes a longer time. And so that's where you're trying to show, we talked about a staff value is, Bible talks about outdo one another with honor. And so honor just means to give weight to. And, if you've been there 2 or 3 years and you got somebody that's been there 50 years, you really want to, it's not that you bow down. I mean, you are called to be the leader, but you want to show those guys respect. If you're going to be in there for the long haul, if you're only there in your mind, you're like, I'm here for, I'm here for 5 years and I'm going to the next place, which that leads to a lot of different issues. But if it's like, as far as I know, I'm going to be here for a good long time. We're going to do this together. Take your time, because you stack wins up. It allows you to do ones that are pretty important, but not necessarily immediate. A quick example, just to flesh it out. Like when we got to Biltmore, and a more obvious one to do. Okay, this will be funny because it'll be with John Mark. So, and if this is offensive to somebody in youth choir, it's not meant to be. But so when I first got there, Biltmore had a lot of great things about it. What it did not have is, even though the name acts like it is, the church was not in good financial shape. Didn't have a lot of money. Had very little money in the bank. But the name Biltmore, and we had a Nordstrom's looking lobby, so it looked like we were rich. So right. I get in there and start looking over the budget and so forth, and I was like, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but again, John Mark was the student pastor at this point, and I looked, and there was some huge amount to a youth choir mission trip. Like, what was it, John Mark? 70,000 or something? 50,000?
That's right. Oh yeah, that's what it was. You got
it. For a youth choir mission trip. Now,
my goodness.
1 week.
1 week. And I came from a place where youth choir, to your first question, I didn't grow up in church. I never saw the value of youth choir. And, to be honest, I didn't have a youth choir in Humble either. So I got here and I was like, good gracious, man, we don't have 70,000 in the bank. What are we doing spending 70,000 on youth choir mission trip? So long story short, I got the music guy and I'm like, hey, my long term, I don't really see this. Is this something that's like a big value add? And he's like, not really. We just not that way. And I'm like, John Mark brought him. He's like, do you like youth choir? He's like, no, it's not important to me. I was like, oh, here's what we do. We need half of that money for the budget. Why don't you guys go split the 35 or 40 grand? You all can do whatever you want to with it. And we'll just kind of eliminate youth choir. Now, it was already almost dead. So that was I spent a chip, but not a ton of chips. You know what I'm saying? So that's an easy win.
Yeah.
And then
it released us to do ministry. Like that money, like it sent us into orbit as a student ministry because we had money to do some things.
Because I don't even know if y'all had 70,000 in the youth programming budget at that point. So I'm like, and so all the parents are happy. That gives you some credibility, yada, yada. Versus, let's say, year 4, year 5, there was a massive Christmas program. And coming from Houston, Asheville was a little behind at the times. So we're coming from Houston where, and again, not to offend, but the Christmas cantatas, the pageants, and all that kind of stuff, I could see that being less evangelistic than maybe they were years before, where the culture had changed. And so at that point, it wasn't until year 5, and this one had a very large one. I mean, we're talking about the Camels and 400-member choir and blah, 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 blah. It would have been foolish, absolutely foolish. I mean, when I first got here, I was like, that's not going to be here in 5 years, but it would have been stupid if I had done it right off the bat because they didn't know me. I would have lost 500 people right off the bat. It would have been zeal without knowledge. But you waited and waited and waited and waited, and by year 5, you're like, here's what we like to do. We've got a massive homeless population in Asheville. We've got a massive food insecurity issue. You already had a bunch of travel buses coming from Knoxville to see this. It was less evangelistic and more Christian entertainment, and it was becoming obvious. And so by year 5, when we switched it, and we got buy-in from the worship people, and it was a minor blip on the screen. So that would be an example of, man, knock the small limbs down first, get some wins, stack the wins, momentum begins, and then the big changes. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's obvious you got to, but most of the time they can wait.
That's good.
Get the small ones.
I recently interviewed Josh Powell, a dear friend of mine, and John Marks, Taylor's First Baptist.
Good guy.
And John Mark said his encouragement was, when you walk into church, most guys walk into a new church looking at what they can change. Walk into the new church looking at what you can keep. Like change the perspective a little bit. What can I take? What's loved, and what can I run with, and lean into that as I make change in the places that I really need to make change in. It was a really helpful comment. So we're talking a lot of this. Go ahead, Bruce.
One last thing to these guys listening about change. Don't underestimate. Make sure you share your heart with the people. Meaning this. Like, for example, one of the things we changed when I got here, it was coat and tie on the platform, but you could tell it was just a platform culture, not a church culture, because there wasn't many ties out in the church. So I knew that was a platform decision. So as we began to get a little more casual on the platform, I was doing Q&As with, like, say, senior adults, and I didn't know this for like 2 years, but they were like, "How come you're getting rid of coat and tie on the platform?" And I shared about how sometimes that can be an artificial obstacle between the pulpit and the pew, and shared about how I don't want the people that can't afford that. I just shared what you guys would share if you were asked the same question, but I shared my heart about lost people. And I only found this out 2 years later, but our senior adult guy came to me and he goes, "Man, I just had a fascinating conversation." And he mentioned the gentleman's name and just said that he was reflecting on how 2 years ago he was ready to leave the church because he felt like you not wearing a coat and tie was irreverent, lacked reverence for God. But when he heard your heart at this Q&A that I'd since forgotten about, he said that changed everything. And now he was like a super faithful, bought-in person. And so I would say don't underestimate sharing that common. Most all of God's people, they love lost people and they love the Bible, and it's your job to make sure that, listen, I'm diving in deeper to this. I'm not going away from it.
That's
and Ronnie,
really good.
Just a thought too, just to echo on what Pastor just said. I think sometimes you can come into a church and like I guess Josh was saying, you see all the things you want to change, but man, what that church needs is the power and the presence of God in those worship services. And so, you can spend all your time trying to fix all these auxiliary things, but man, if God's moving in your service and people are getting saved, and you're preaching the Bible and the Holy Spirit is working, that is, I guess, what I would say is what has to stay the main thing. We want to say we got to get these churches and all these perfect structural whatever. Man, we need the presence of God, and we need His Word to be proclaimed and people's lives to be saved, and everything else we can work on as we go.
That's good. All this conversation is sort of dancing around a really important key, just general leadership in a church. And certainly we want to be pastors who depend on the Word of God, the power of God, the Spirit of God, all those things, and center our churches around the Word and preach the Word and God's work. How would you encourage pastors to articulate and communicate a compelling vision for their church? I know you've done this at Biltmore. And I'll give you the framework here. Every church is sort of a reflection of the senior pastor's heart. There's a reason Biltmore is known as an evangelistic. You're a multi-site church with 6 campuses. You've got a worldwide presence in terms of missions and all the things. That all started with your heart and a mission that God put in it. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about how that got there and how you would encourage a guy to communicate their own kind of vision?
Yeah, and for clarity, when I stepped in here, the church already had a love for evangelism, and it had grown stale a little bit, and the culture had changed rapidly around them, so it needed to be reframed a little bit. But I did step into a church where I didn't have to teach them. They already loved lost people being saved. And sometime, if it's been a while since the church has seen that has to almost be stirred up again. Couple of principles and a couple of pragmatics. The principle-wise is any vision has got to be, in my opinion, any God-given vision has got to be based on the Great Commission. It's not like we just come up. It's just the Great Commission put in language that your people can, that you can stay with for a while. Because again, it's going to be something about, making disciples, and you want it to be where you can, and you got to communicate it. And I would say some of the things that I've learned, number one, is you can't communicate it too much, and there's 1,000 different ways to communicate it. Most people, I know early on in ministry, I thought you'd do a vision series and then do the rest of the stuff. And what I've learned is you do vision series. We've actually changed it. I learned something from a buddy down in Jacksonville, Joby Martin, how they have a vision weekend, and I'm like, man, that's almost a theme for the year. And so we've done that the last few years, and it's been a very unifying thing. So there's always that learning. But I would say, number one, what is the Great Commission put in a context that you want to replicate? Mm-hmm. I think staff-wise, your vision, if you have a multi-staff church, all of us know organizations that have a vision that nothing is tied to as far as rewards, attaboys, applause. I think it's what you inspect, you can expect to get. And so if you have staff, the best thing I felt like you can do to staff is clarity. Not the best thing. It's unfair though to ask your staff and hold them accountable for something that's not clear. So I think as a leader, clarity is key. So number one, get a Great Commission vision. Again, I know Joby's because I've been down there enough. It's like we're a movement for all people to discover and deepen a relationship with Jesus Christ. All right, that is the same thing as mine. It's like we are here to glorify God by making disciples of Jesus who reach up, reach in, reach out. I mean, John Mark, what's y'all's?
Glorify God and make disciples by inspiring people to follow Jesus. I mean,
those are all, that's the Great Commission. So I think number one is get that, and then realize it's going to take 2 years for all your people to get it. I'm talking about, depending on the size of your church, it's going to take a while. I'm talking about your preschool volunteer, if you have a coffee deal, if you have multi-site, blah, 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 blah. But then I would say, you got to go back to that, Ronnie, because whoever said it first, I don't know, but vision does leak. The three of us, I mean, you and I think church all the time. We're thinking church 24/7. Our lay people are not. And I think, every way you can do it. I've learned to do it in the announcements even. If you just have a video about missions, it's like, hey, just remember, this is part of that great reaching out, whether it be the theme of the year. I don't have one. I had one right there, but we come out with first part of the year, Vision Sunday, make it big. Pamphlet, here's where we're going this year. We're going to start a campus in Waynesville. Here's the church plants. The theme, last year was the year of worship. So it was like, here are the teaching series, bump. It's like, here are the 5 dates I'm asking you to save because we're a family. So healthy families live on rhythms. Here are the 5 dates that are the rhythms of our family, Easter, Christmas, outdoor baptism, student camp, whatever it is for you. So, there's those big visions, and then everything from language to pictures around the church to videos to, it's starting to take effect when you can have a secret shopper come in and ask the person in preschool, hey, what's this church about? And they say the same thing that you said when the secret shopper's there the next day. So again, there's 100 ways to do it. You don't even have to be, sometimes, I know early on I thought vision guys were a certain model, super charismatic, loud, extroverted. And I've learned that's not the case. I mean, you can learn how to move. People do go to a preferred future. So like John Mark just put it great. I meant to write it down. When he was talking about earlier, I want to take what Concord was and continue it or something like. I was like, I didn't teach you that. I don't know. That's brilliant, because especially going into an established church like that. A lot of times when you go into a new church, especially young guys, you inadvertently put the current church down and you elevate the church you came from. And there's not a lot more demoralizing for people to hear that about 3 times before they're like, well, why did you come here if you thought that place was so great? Or do we stink that bad? So there's a way to do that. But I would say, Ronnie, big picture, you need to paint it. You need to paint it often. You need to tie it into 100 little things. And then if you do have a staff, I do think you show clearly, and it takes a while. Last thing, and I'm not to hog the conversation, I'm saying if you go into one with multiple staff, they don't know if you mean what you're saying or not. Because many senior pastors have gone one direction for 3 years. They go to a conference and they hear something brand new, and then they shift directions. And then you got all these staff, they're scurrying and they're working their tails off to make this thing happen. And then right as they get it going, he changes direction again. So to me, the vision has got to be broad enough. And again, if it's based on the Great Commission, it might tweak a little bit. And then that goes back to that strategic plan that John Mark talked about. To me, that's key. It's like, hey, guys, this really is what we're going to do. And it might take a year. This is what we're shooting at. And and then try to reward them, whether that be recognition if you can't afford something. He's like, great job, John Mark, on, finding us the great location for the East Campus or something like that. So I would just think big and small when it comes to casting vision.
No, that's really helpful. John Mark, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think he said clarity, and I totally agree. I mean, my experience here, if it had ever been written in Outreach Magazine, we'd tried it. And so it was like just the perseverance to like, man, I've got a biblical vision. You know what I mean? If it's under the authority of the Great Commission, it's, in alignment with Scripture. And so I don't have to parse this thing 900 ways. I can stick to my guns. And so just the perseverance to be clear and be predictable. What I'm learning is, it doesn't mean boring. It just means like the more predictable and consistent I can be in my chair as the senior pastor, the more clarity flows to the organization. And so I even have to be careful, like who I say an idea to, because I may be just kind of thinking about something. And if I'm not careful, I'll say it to the wrong person, and that'll create mud in the water. I fish all the time, so it'll put mud in the water, and I need them in clear water. And so, so I think when it comes to like, man, have a biblical vision, stick with it, be clear about it, man. In big moments and little moments, but then persevere through the temptations to jump to the next new thing, because the Lord's going to build His church.
Yeah,
that's good. And I'll say this. Oh, go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say, and if you do it that way, if it's a broad, there's a bunch of little things underneath it that might change year to year, like the strategic plan. Yeah. Like last year's is like under the reach out. The big picture might be, you might have reach out, and underneath that multi-site, and then underneath that might be, okay, this year we're planning on doing the Waynesville campus. So it's not that it's static, but it's the guardrails, and it's kind of like you guys probably have 5 or 6, 7, maybe 3 or 4 verses that you always tell your people, like Romans 8:1, or one of those ones that you use all the time. And you do that not because you don't know the verses. You want your people being able to say Romans 8:1 without even thinking about it. And so in the same way, if you do something on community or whatever, you just tie that right back into whatever that phrase is. So again, I'd say you do it often, you do it big, you do it small, you do it through video, you do it through whatever. And you tie it to the Bible, obviously, with your people. So that's the way you make it stick.
That's really good. And I'll say to all the pastors listening here today, you are the voice of the church. You are you've got the loudest voice. You've got the megaphone. You have to be the one communicating vision and mission. And you can't just outsource that and say, well, the Bible's going to tell us to do whatever. You've got to take it. You've got to package it. You got to deliver what the Bible says. And you got to call your people to run toward a vision. And that vision is right there in the Great Commission. It is reaching the lost. It is planting churches, sending missionaries. I mean, our mission statement at Christ Community is making gospel-centered disciples among all people for the glory of God. It's all the Great Commission. We've got to be about what Jesus was about. And I encourage you guys, man, we're doing it all for the glory of the Lord. And I love getting to learn from these guys. I made some notes today here from both of them. And I reminded myself that I don't hardly talk about our mission statement in the services. Services start and we do things, but man, what a missed opportunity not to reinforce what we believe in the service. So thank you for that. I want to thank you both for your time today, for hanging out with us. Bruce, if someone wanted to track you down, where could they find you at on social media or on the internet?
Sure. I mean, I'm probably going to limit Twitter. I'm sitting there doing a deal on. I am doing Mary and Martha, and just all that being said, I'm not going to give the Twitter, but they can either email me at bfrank@biltmorechurch.com. They can Instagram, Facebook, any of that kind of stuff would be great. Or they can awesome. Biltmorechurch.com has information. Love to help. We give our stuff out all the time, so we'd love to give it to you if it would be helpful.
Perfect. I encourage you guys to check out Bruce online. A great preacher of the word. And John Mark Harrison. Again, John Mark, thankful for you. And I think we should give it to you to sing Rocky Top on the way out today. I'm just kidding.
Absolutely.
I do want to thank everyone for listening today. If you're enjoying what you are hearing, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. When you do, it helps us produce more content because the podcast grows and have more conversations just like this one with some of the best leaders across the country. So thanks for listening today, and we'll see you on the next episode.